The term education has become too academicized. Shouldn't we be asking ourselves, what is our plan for this year for the broader formation of our children? Do we have a plan for education in the more important sense of forming them to be good persons? Formation of persons should always be towards virtue. So education is always fundamentally virtue-based. The first thing in the formation of human persons, the most foundational thing, is actually forming their tastes. Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Educating our children, some practical principles. I think one of the things that we are most asked about by parents is how to think about educating their children, especially as it's coming towards, quote, the next school year. Parents realize there's some very concrete, practical decisions they need to make. But I think it's worth taking this as an opportunity to say, let's take a broader view. What is education anyway, in the most important sense? How does this fit with our whole family household project? And how do we think about the academic in that context?
Yeah, that's great. I like it. I like you putting it that way, because very often when people ask us the question about how do you think about education, educating your children, I think often what people are thinking is, what do you think about homeschooling versus sending your kids to school? And this conversation is actually not about that decision about whether you choose to educate your children at home or send them to an academic institution. It's actually principles that are kind of prior to that and that apply regardless of whether you're educating your children at home or whether you're sending your child to be educated at another institution.
I think that's right. But I think also these principles can help, though we're not going to directly address it or apply it that way. We can do that another time. But I think it will help people think, given which one of those ones to do.
Absolutely.
By thinking in terms of these goals.
Sure.
Place to start. And we'll end up sharing some very concrete things about what we've done. But always start at the universal level. What are we doing in a household? What are we making together here? I always go back. I love Aristotle, St. Thomas's reference to this great virtue of domestic prudence. What in Greek for Aristotle was economia, the art of household management. This is art of crafting a life together in marriage, making this household. And I love to go back to Aristotle saying that what is the goal? The goal is true human flourishing, but it's flourishing in this household context where these two kinds of personal relationships are central. Spousal relationship, parent-to-child relationship. And he even goes so far as to say you can just see the goal as the flourishing of these relationships. It's because in a sense, if those relationships are flourishing, of course, the people are flourishing. And I love it. It's kind of like one of those points about friendship. To be flourishing in friendship, true friendship, is to be flourishing as a human being. You might say if we're flourishing in our spousal relationship, if our children and we are flourishing in our relationship to one another, then this is going to be human flourishing.
Yeah.
So I think I really think already this says something very big, that education is an essential part, a key part. If education is formation, we need to begin there. In Latin, it just kind of means to raise up. And the raising of children is the educare, the educatio of them. The Greek word for education, paideia, comes from the Greek word for child. Again, it's this very broad sense of it's kind of what you do to form the young so that they become the full, well-rounded human person in the truest sense. And this is not a throwaway line. This is it. We need to stop and recognize the term education has become too academicized
or specialized.
So that when we think, well, what are we doing for our child's education? It's okay to use the term the way it's commonly used, but note, even among ourselves, what are you doing for your child's education this year? They absolutely mean 99 out of 100 times what academic formation are you going to give them? And that the very use of the term in that way, I think, can have the problem of focusing parents too much on, if I'm taking care of their academic needs / formation, then I am taking care of my children.
That's what formation consists in, is giving them academic formation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, look, parents, not that any parent would directly say, all that matters is the academics. I think we're all aware that there are these other elements, but still, I really think it's still worth our stopping and recognizing, as we're looking towards the coming year, say, shouldn't we be asking ourselves, what is our plan for this year for the broader formation of our children?
Mhm.
Why do we only ask ourselves? It's understandable about the academic, but let's just turn this into an opportunity. We have an opportunity to be intentional, and this is the thing. Otherwise, it's just too easy to slip through the cracks. Do we have a plan
Mhm.
for education in the more important sense
Mhm.
of forming them to be good persons? Naturally, you can say forming them to be good citizens. You can say forming them to be members of the church, be ultimately of the city of God, as well as of the city of man. I think we should linger here for a little bit. And if someone says, well, actually, what I really need to talk about is the academic, well, I understand that. And we will talk about that. But are we moving too quickly to that?
Mm.
Because if we think of the other first, that will change how we do the academic.
Yeah, although can I just try to stretch us a little bit here? It strikes me when you were speaking right now, you were using the word relationship a lot. And then, of course, we had the whole question of academic education. So education drawing out the child. And then we have academic education. And you were cautioning that maybe we not think of their education as being exclusively defined by their academic education. I just want to share a concept that Charlotte Mason had that actually will help us to kind of even look at their education, their academic education differently. So I kind of want to even push a little bit, even when we say academic education, we might even have the wrong notion or not enough nuanced notion of what academic education is. And Charlotte Mason beautifully describes education, especially starting at the very early years, academic education being one of relationship. It's information that's imparted to a very young child through someone with whom they have a relationship. And for that reason, they trust what the person tells them. So when we tell a very young child, this is red or this is blue, this is a kind of an academic formation of them, but it's imparted through a relationship in a very organic and natural way. So often we don't recognize it that way. And then she continues to say, and then as the child grows and their need and their interest becomes broader, and perhaps it's their interest for information and broader information exceeds the parent's ability to give them that, then the parent and the child turn to books. And books are not just kind of a static thing that impart facts, but we should look at it as, again, a personal relationship. The author, whom the parent knows who they are and trusts, imparts information, and the parent and the child then acquire that information. So it's just a beautiful way of actually understanding even academic education actually should be more similar to, or have as a part of its spirit, a greater similarity to kind of the broader education that we're talking about that happens within the home. I think that's pretty important because otherwise, if we think of academic education as something that's very fact-based and that the professionals do it and that we're not, it unnecessarily narrows even those facts that the children are learning. Yeah. And we all know that if you take a fact out of context, it all of a sudden can become very untrue. So I think it's very important for us to remember that actually maybe the primary environment for education is that broader environment of education in the home. And then even the kind of more specialized, more factual education that we call academic education actually grows from that and is always a part of it in spirit in some form or fashion, although it may become more specialized and more of a discipline is developed around its acquisition.
That makes a lot of sense. It really just strikes me that it's good anthropology. It's good, in other words, rooted in human nature to say, in a very important sense, knowledge is always about relationship.
I love that. It's
always
super important.
I mean, because human life is always about relationship. And education or studying or academics can be done in such a way that really isolates a person. And there's something wrong there. That's really rich. That has implications that go beyond what I think that I could comprehend at the moment. But I do want to keep coming back to that in my own mind. It's always rich to go back to God's purpose in creating us. It's all about personal relationship. God ultimately shares his knowledge with us so that we can live with him
Mm-hmm.
in that knowledge. There's some real aspect of that in parents sharing knowledge with their children so they can live together in that. Not that education is only about the parents' knowledge, but there is a kind of primacy to that. And that doesn't preclude, by the way, that sometimes parents will educate a child beyond what the parents know. It might be that they have a child who has, say, greater ability to grasp and pursue certain kinds of knowing. That's going to be a little bit later on, but there's nothing wrong at all with, in that way, kind of the student, the disciple surpassing
The
the
teacher.
master, though it should never then be fundamentally a separation, because it's still ultimately about a relationship that's going to draw us together, but it also gives the context of a broader community. The education is not just about the relationship only of parent to child. We might say we are forming our children in a relationship with us, very much to empower them to have relationships with others, if their spouse one day, if they choose to be married. That's a really beautiful thing to think of, forming them to see the world in such a way that they'll be inclined and capable of seeing the world together with the others that they love. Well, let's move on a little bit then, and I think something else that is in the Greeks that I think is very important, and that is, again, points to the kind of the breadth of education. Plato at one point refers to education as forming the likes and dislikes, the pleasures and the pains of the child. And really, this can be cast in Aristotle's terms or St. Thomas Aquinas' terms. There's different kinds of virtues. Formation of persons should always be towards virtue. So education is always fundamentally virtue-based. And there's a distinction between intellectual virtues and moral virtues. And I think we too quickly go, again, when we go in the academic direction, that's can be over-intellectually. It's missing the formation of moral virtues. And here we can just note this about moral virtues. They're fundamentally a matter of what we call appetite, or taste, of affection, the likes and dislikes. The first thing in the formation of human persons, there's always an intellectual element, but the first, most foundational thing is actually forming their tastes. With the young, you can be right from the start kind of forming them in love, forming what they love, what they want, the things they enjoy doing, before they understand very much of kind of the whys of what they're doing. And so this shows up, for instance, in when Plato talks about education, of how there's the gymnastic aspect of the formation of the body, and some type of formation and health of the body in a very broad sense is very important. But then the other was musike, music in our sense, but that also included stories and poetry. And the point here is this, having this kind of primacy early on. Later on, then Plato's going to talk about going into what are called the liberal arts and forming the mind more specifically, through arithmetic and grammar and so forth. But isn't it interesting that at first, and picture the children, what makes them most come alive is as it were the expansion of their heart. And so right off the bat, we ask ourselves a practical question: in this next year, what are we going to be doing to be forming the tastes, the desires, the pleasures, the likes and dislikes of our children? This is far too seldom considered.
Wow, that just kind of blows me away, because when you think about it, what we reach for are the things that we like. And if we have the power to form what our children like, and we carefully kind of respect that responsibility by helping them to love or like or desire good things, that's what they're going to be choosing. And that makes all the difference, because there's going to be a lot of choices ahead of them. It's kind of what they like determines what they will turn their face toward when they go out to the world. And that's pretty amazing. So it sounds like really what you're talking about. I mean, when we say education, again, just kind of habitually and by default in conditioning, we think about the school-aged child. But it sounds like what you're talking about is actually really starts much before the school-aged child. And so that we should really be kind of, I mean, obviously in some ways you could even stretch it out and just say, isn't this the education of home life? From the moment a child is born, that's precisely what we're doing by giving them an intentional environment that is geared toward the good. We are actually forming their appetite. But it's pretty kind of, it's amazing. A lot of people think about kind of accelerated learning, and that we're going to, teach our 2-year-old how to tell the difference between quantities and things like that. There's all kinds of, respecting the innate intelligence of a child and giving them early opportunities to learn. Well, I just think that really
There
what
can be
you're
a place
talking
for
about,
that.
and surely, but it seems like it's a little bit of a distraction if it covers up the fact that there's that really what we're trying to form in the children is their appetites.
Amen.
And that starts from a very, very young age.
Good. So in other words, I think I see you're going after. It's like the gung-ho parent can be like, okay, I'm going to start my child's education early. And they're thinking in that education is like, okay, right, recognizing quantities, getting them ready to do math. Again, that might be something that's it's reasonable to do. But educating our child, we want to talk about something that forms our children, prioritizing spending time with them from the moment they are born. That we prioritize being together in bodily presence as persons, doing simple, joyful things together. This is the formation of the heart of the person, of an infant right from the start. As I'm holding an infant and speaking to him or her words of love, then a later, reading those very early books just as a way, because I want to be with you. I'm convinced that how we forming them by spending times of plenitude with them from the start it must not be overlooked. What are we telling them about what our priorities are from the beginning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that's basically solidifying the thing that is the root of all education, which is relationship.
Amen.
It's laying
Amen.
the foundation so that any education that happens after that point is rooted in a foundation that's very secure and solid.
Amen. So from the start, maybe put it this way: we show them, we help them feel by practice the importance of times of plenitude. The home is a place of times of plenitude. Ultimately, life is about times of plenitude, richness, some very simple, of ways of being together in knowledge and in love, in work and in leisure, that we give them a taste for this is what they enjoy doing. They enjoy being together in simple ways. Talk about something that also it should be, if our heart isn't already there, then we need formation. Mm-hmm. And of course, isn't this part of the beautiful plan that when we look at what our children need, it reminds us again of ways that we need to be forming our own heart if it hasn't already been formed in that direction. Oh my goodness, I want my child to experience this, want that child to want to be at home, to feel peace and joy and security in the center of the home. Well, then I need to feel peace and joy and security in the center of the home. How am I going to choose that? What am I going to do to actually make that active? This is formation of the human person right at the heart. And this has to do with how we intentionally design everything, how we spending our Sundays, again, right from the youngest ages. But then again, once they're beyond those youngest ages, the singing together, the reading aloud, the telling of stories, the going for the walks together, the starting to have conversations about the things that we are seeing in the world. This is having the soul come alive to the spiritual goods, to the richer ways that human persons are together. Give me a person who has been formed in that way already when they come to college. You're going to see a huge difference in their ability to live in a community and their interest in the questions that philosophers and theologians are asking because of those most fundamental dispositions that started when they were infants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That really has to be the foundation. And from there, the rest of the conversation happens.
So we could talk more about concrete things that are done in that vein, but just really want to encourage that category. Times of plenitude, developing their taste, just like we have to develop their taste in food. We always, by the way, this is great respect for the person, because always remember this fundamental philosophical principle. to help them, to form them to enjoy what is truly good, is to attune them to the truth of the world. And that's never to violate their personal space or their freedom, to help them feel, this is a very Aristotle way of putting it, to help them feel things as they are, to recoil from the evil, to be attracted to and enjoy the good, is to attune them to the truth of reality, which is what they are designed for. So it is bringing out their inner self, which of course is always what education is. When it's not social engineering where we've decided we happen to want to make them in this particular image. It's rooted in our conviction about what the truth of human nature is, what they are designed for, and to have these joys and pleasures and these pains are precisely what they are made for, what is most human, what is the truth. So what are those activities in our home that will help them do that? And it's the type of things that we talk about in these podcasts all the time, about the different things like the kind of work together we do, the kind of play together we do, the kind of amusement that we do, the kind of leisure that we do. So how about then if we then start to transition into, all right, but then there is the realm of the academic. There is the realm of more directly trying to form their minds. So what do you think we should do going in that direction?
Well, first of all, I think we definitely don't want the conversation to be about the relative merits and demerits of homeschooling versus sending your child to an academic institution. One thing I do want to point out, though, is that kind of in the context of the principles that we're talking about, if you are homeschooling your child, it feels like, okay, great, I can apply these principles because I'm actually the architect of the particulars of what we're going to be introducing. Now, I want to say that if you don't have this principle of personal relationship, of developing an appetite or desire for the good or the true, the very work that we're doing at home can become a kind of a fact mill and become almost it ends up being somewhat torturous to a child. So you're not saved just because you are quote unquote homeschooling. If you leave behind those principles and you're just doing an application of facts and a checking of the box, it doesn't matter where you're doing it, whether it's in an academic institution or if it's the parent cracking the whip. It becomes kind of an empty shell that's missing the most important interior. So first of all, that's a danger. Homeschooling isn't like a solution to, education is great because you're homeschooling. You have to keep the correct principles at heart, right? Yep. But in some senses, it's easier because you're actually choosing, especially at very young ages, first and second grade, kindergarten, you're actually choosing the activities that are going to be kind of opening their mind towards certain concepts that then their formal academic education will be built on. So you have a lot of freedom there. And it is kind of wonderful how you can be directly involved and kind of seeing the application of these principles we're talking about. If you're choosing to send your child to school, that's a little bit more challenging because obviously you're not the architect of what they're learning day to day. You're not there kind of in the moments of contact, of personal contact. It doesn't mean that it's not in your control to keep applying these principles to your child's education. So I feel like that's important to make clear that homeschooling isn't like the answer that by virtue of itself, all of a sudden education is correct, because we can apply it incorrectly and just as kind of fact-oriented as any institution that's kind of abusive and not relationship-oriented. And also sending your child to an academic institution, while you might not have as much involvement in the practical, you still are in a position to influence that formation with with your eye toward all of these principles that we're talking about: personal relationship, wonder, forming of the appetite. These are things that are still very much in our control. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging because you're not involved in the day-to-day. Sometimes it's more freeing, actually, because sometimes in a homeschool environment, when you're the one applying the discipline of the exercise of certain academic habits, it can sometimes, the very enforcing of those habits and repetitions can sometimes affect negatively the relationship between the parent and the child. So, I just want to just say out there, it's not like one is supremely better than the other. In both of them, we are the parents. We are responsible for the children's education. And ultimately, we can affect our children's education. We're just going to have to learn different skills in different situations in order to be able to best apply the principles of good education.
I think that's a great point. And I think it's worth reemphasizing. I think sometimes when parents find a good school that they trust to send their children to, it can too easily lead to, okay, kind of,
don't have to think about that one.
Yeah. Now I'm spending the money on it. but I'm spending on so we got good people taking care of them, so I kind of know everything's fine. Well, first of all, there can be a great relief of, hey, we got people that get in an age appropriate way, are tuned into this. They have the art of teaching, and they've arranged the materials. This absolutely can be very freeing, very appropriate. But there is this aspect, always bearing in mind, again, it is about relationship. And particularly, I'm thinking about this from the viewpoint of fathers, but I mean, obviously mothers too, who are, again, if they're kind of taking their children to school, picking them up, bringing them home, whatever they're, having to make that extra effort and really be tuned into this. It's easy to say it. Do we know what they're studying? Are we asking them?
Are we engaged?
Are we really engaging in that? And it's not so much out of, well, we just need to make sure that they're getting what they're supposed to be getting.
Or they're not getting bad stuff.
There's an element of that. Sure, we should know, because it's just appropriate that we be tuned in that way, even if we do very much trust the persons. But this is an opportunity to look at reality together. It's so much, well, I don't want to go on necessarily personal here and thinking about certain times when I was in school. School can be very isolating and can very much just become this thing that I do and I get taken care of. And I just think parents can think in terms of breaking through that. Obviously, there is something, there's going to be time that the child is kind of on his own, or reading on his own, or studying on his own. And that's an important part of maturing. The world needs to be thought about together, and keep coming back to that, and really be taking real steps of tell me, son, what are you studying? Oh, you read this book. What was your experience of this book? Daddy's read this book too. Let's have a conversation about this. This sounds like a throwaway or obvious.
Or Daddy hasn't read this book. Tell me what's in it. Tell me about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So that as an aspect of how do the parents stay involved in keeping it about relationship, even as they are turning over to others to educate their children, is something that a lot of us are going to have to learn. And obviously, as it goes on and the children get older, there's more and more the children will be doing on their own. They'll be capable of doing on their own. There's going to be less checking up. But I'm just going to say now, as regards teenagers, let's ask, does our involvement in the, quote, education of our children become less when they get to high school? Again, I go back to our problem from earlier on of how, and again, particularly if we're blessed with a number of children, and now at this point, kind of formation of the children is just kind of triage to trying to get things done the best way that we possibly can in the difficult circumstances. Children going off to high school, and okay, well, at least we know they're getting, having good classes there. Are we still, first of all, tuned into now, in some sense, more than ever? Hopefully it's already been begun before this. It'll be very hard to start now, but it absolutely must be continued. What is forming their tastes and desires? Let's return to that now, where, okay, they're going off, maybe they're in high school. They're spending much more time outside the family, which is okay. They're spending more time with their peers, which is fitting, but all the more, especially in this day and age, even in good communities, we have to be very tuned in to how are their likes and dislikes? How are their affections being cultivated now? I think we could have a pretty frank conversation. We didn't need to go deeply into it. There are schools that are very good schools where we trust the people that are there, where some families will find that now even the children that their children are spending a lot of time with have very different priorities in their life, have different likes and dislikes, tastes, have a different sense of, are there such thing as these times of plenitude, and are very much going in the direction of youth culture. This is where maybe, again, a kind of primacy of the moral side, not simply taking forms of a bunch of rules, although there's a place of rules. So I'm not going to, try to do the whole thing right now of how to raise a teenager. But in this context, just to be, again, in the spirit of, what are we doing this year to educate our children? Are we, when it comes to those that are tweens or teens, are we asking ourselves that question? Again, what will be forming their heart? What do they enjoy doing? How are we making sure that they are getting a taste for the higher things and experiencing them in such a way that will draw them in joy? This is quite a task.
And I think as you describe that, it just strikes me that really this is an ongoing invitation for parents to be revisiting that question in general amongst themselves. What are the things that we should be developing a taste for in our children? Do we have a taste for those things? Are we doing those things in our own life? It's like reminding yourself, getting ready for the school year. Wait a minute, this is a family value that we have. This is something we want to inculcate in our children. It's really easy for us as parents who are just, the day to day has a lot of practicalities in it that help. We just kind of lose our focus on what are the things that are most important to us. What are the things that are most important for us to inculcate in our children. So I think that's just, as you were speaking, it struck me, wow, I think it might be good. We're thinking in terms of what are the things our child is going to love? What are the things that they're going to desire? What do we want them to be able to see? The question is, what do we love? What do we desire? What appetites are we developing in ourselves to help us kind of refocus
Amen.
about what we're giving our children?
Amen. And can we linger there again? Right now, maybe just call it tweens, teens, of what are we doing? What are we doing with them? It is fitting that they be going out and they'd be spending more time out there. But I think it's absolutely critical, and this is something that I've seen, that I think very often, again, particularly in families where they're blessed to have a number of children, there then is kind of, all right, they're going out, and there's a certain kind of demand on the younger of, kind of more immediate needs. And there's just kind of this assumption that kind of things are going to be going okay there, and not so much the high intentionality about what kind of family activities are we doing that draw in those older, still living at home children, and make home a place that they still want to be. Again, it's natural and fitting that they want to start to go out there. But I think, I'm just going to say it, too often, homes are not a very welcoming, warm, joyful place where there's the kind of life and activity going on there that particularly makes children, as they're starting to get a little bit older, wants to be there. And sometimes we can feed into this by, constantly trying to get them the good experience. We're taking them here and we're taking them there, and it's that club and it's that sport. Again, there's a time for these things, but I'm going to be a little like the Lorax. I'm not speaking for the trees, but I'm speaking for the household. There's a time to help them to get ready to transition, but part of that transitioning involves still having the centripetal forces towards the center, not fleeing the center, of we still enjoy doing these rich things together in our home that are starting to give them a taste for not just things they did as children, but the type of things that you do in a more mature context. Let's not underestimate parents. Sure, they're not cool companions, as it were, necessarily for teenagers. They should still be rich companions in the kind of things going on in the home. This is a huge part of what they want in life, which is what they're going to do in life, which means it's what education is about.
Yeah, I just want to say, by kind of way of encouragement, even if you're doing things very well in your home and your home is a really warm, loving place to be, because of a teenager's need to experience the greater world, they experience that pull very strongly. And so they may be really wanting to go out. And so creating a space for them to be at home and encouraging them to be at home and enjoy a family context can sometimes feel like, to the parent, my goodness, this child just does not want this. And it can be very discouraging. I just want to say, coraggio. They actually deep down inside do want it, and they do appreciate it. Maybe it's an invitation for us to always get better and better in how we do this, but to not despair interiorly, like you have, like, this is a losing fight. Okay, we're going to pretend we're all having a great time. Well, right now you're like, it's not fun with this sulking teenager here who wanted to go somewhere else. Have courage. Just keep your heart open. Keep doing the same good things. The reality is the child has a lot of conflicting desires, and the draw to be in a warm, secure home environment is actually something they still have. It's just they haven't reconciled that yet. So I just want to say courage on the part of for the parents, that sometimes it feels like, wow, am I just forcing them to do something they really don't want to do? They might not feel like they want to do it at the moment, but it is something that deep down inside them. And it's good for them.
Let's change gears just a little bit. And I'm often asked, as a philosophy professor at college, what do I like to see in students that come to college? What do they need to have been formed in beforehand? A lot going on here. Not going to be able to give any type of sufficient treatment, but just throw out a couple of things. Sometimes I'm of the opinion there could be disagreement on this. I'm not saying I'm the expert on exactly what should or shouldn't happen before you get to college academically. I think that parents can be too focused on kind of working the system of like what is studied at a prep high school so that you will be perfectly positioned to get at great university, entry. Complicated. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get into a great university or hard to get into university, and having jumping through some hoops in order to have, as it were, on your resume or your high school, what do you call it, the record of what you've done. That you have those things that you look good when it comes to your application. I'm not poo-pooing that, but I think it can be overemphasized. And I want to kind of go for what are the key things that need to be happening intellectually, perhaps not as much as our system makes us think have to have happened. There, particularly, I want to say, obviously, there's the foundations of we need arithmetic, we need geometry, we need to have mathematical thinking. I'm going to kind of place that now on one side. There's grammar, there's language. Studying Latin, of course, is a great traditional way of forming the mind in many ways, particularly through grammar. That's going to help us in our own language and in other languages, right? There's history. Remember, forming a person is forming a person to be a citizen. We need to know our history. That in itself, it's life is a story. A community has a story, particularly knowing the history of our own community is part of knowing who we are. There's more to history than that, especially when ultimately it is still studied, at the higher reaches. But I think in the reaches we're particularly talking about right here, to recognize it doesn't necessarily have to be done in a super formal way. Again, we don't have to get into whether you're homeschooling, or an institution where they have courses in history all laid out. But history is obviously going to be very important. Literature and stories are huge to be filling the mind with, filling the imagination with good and rich images. This is part of thinking clearly about reality. That's connected to knowing our history. It's connected to being able to start to ask the deeper questions of life, to have a sense of beauty, right? There's so much richness here. There's certain skills. There's the skill of writing. I am a big proponent of something that is clearly not done as much today. I mean, there is something that I think is absolutely worth emphasizing. And there, I don't mean writing in the sense of penmanship, all for penmanship as a sidebar, but at least the rudiments of being able to write good essays, good papers is something that is really a treasure and will serve someone very well when it comes to leaving home, going to college. Not everyone has to go to college. Most will go to college.
And if you don't go to college, the thing about writing is that it helps you learn to organize your thoughts in a coherent manner. So regardless if you go to college or not, to be able to express yourself in a coherent, logical fashion is very, very important. And the exercise of good writing is a discipline of an organization of the mind. So it's in a certain sense, it kind of is the weightlifting of an educated mind.
I
the
hear
thing
you.
that gives you the muscle to be able to properly function in a rational, intelligent communication.
And more, absolutely. What was called natural history, an observation and a study of the natural world and coming to know the species. I am a huge proponent. I think this is a very important preparation for the highest sciences, those in philosophy, those in theology, of understanding the natural world. This is clearly a very big part of a natural design. There's much to be said there. I'm just going to kind of touch and go on that. The whole realm of science and natural science can be tricky because it can be hard to find science that is done in a way that is actually respecting what Aristotle would call nature, rather than taking a kind of hyper-modern approach to the natural world that tends to dissect in order to go kind of deep down inside and give an account simply through the parts, rather than taking in kind of the whole and seeing the order and what we call the teleology of how it's all been kind of woven together. Is a very important preparation for the mind to be able to ask the higher questions of life. So these are difficult issues that I don't intend to try to address right now.
That sounds like kind of your description of natural history sounds kind of almost like a baby step to philosophy. To begin to see the whole in relation to its parts, but never separate from its parts. That sounds like a very important beginning of kind of a philosophical habit of mind.
The parts, very often, science today can look at parts and not appreciate the whole.
Exactly. So naturally, your description of that study of natural history really sounds like it's the beginning of philosophical wonder.
Huge proponents of bird watching, tree identification, knowing natural species in learning to distinguish them and to look for the differences in them is a very important preparation for a philosophical habit of mind. I'm just
Mhm.
going to, at some point, I'd like to address this separately and in greater length, but just want to say this now. I think there's been a well-meaning, but I think misguided movement towards starting to study, quote, philosophy in high school. Just going to kind of go out there and say, in general, I'm against it. I think it was a well-meaning, but a mistake. To try to do something too early can actually undermine, handicap the situation. Frankly, at the college level, I very often would rather have someone who has not studied, quote, philosophy, but has read literature, knows great literature, knows how to write, study grammar, study rhetoric, study logic, but not have tried to start to do what Aristotle calls natural philosophy, the philosophy of nature. Not even really read the works of, you can look at Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, but even that, such richness. I think that trying to start these things, certainly metaphysics, trying to start these things too soon, I think threatens, risks having people have a foundational problem of thinking they know more than they do, and of trying to reckon with something they don't quite yet have the maturity for. I know I'm opening a whole can of worms there, and many people are ready to jump in and say, well, I studied such and such in high school, or I teach such and such
Mhm.
in high school. My children are studying such and such in high school, and they love it, and it's going great. Look, first of all, it varies, but I'm open to that discussion. But I, in any case, wanted to just have sounded the note. Don't be strong-armed, have your arm twisted into, well, if you really want to get them ready for college, have them start studying philosophy now. Just, I'm telling you, as a philosophy professor in college, that does not jibe with my experience.
Mm.
Give me someone, again, going back to the basic principles we've been talking about, whose tastes have been developed well, who have a sense for friendship, who have a sense for times of plenitude. And again, I'm not discounting the importance of the fundaments of the intellectual academic formation that I adverted to,
Mm.
right? Of knowing literature, learning how to write, knowing grammar, hopefully having studied Latin,
Mhm.
mathematics and some science and appropriate science, understanding the natural world. These are all very important preparation then for going off and studying philosophy at college. But I just wanted to have sounded that note, maybe to complete at another time, that the mistake of trying to do too much too soon with a mind
Mm.
that's not ready for it.
I just want to go back to your description of natural philosophy that really struck me. And I think one of the things that also is part of the merit of like a nature study, understanding wildlife, trees, and things like that, is that it also imparts a sense of wonder in the child. And I think the sense of wonder is extremely important in the academic intellectual formation of the mind. And I think that maybe if we're too quick to jump to a specialized version of philosophy or even the sciences, kind of a dissecting down to minute particles that can't be observed by the naked eye, then sometimes we shortchange or short circuit the child's process in discovering wonder. And the reason wonder is so important is it puts us in a position of humility before that which we do not yet know. And that's a very important component in any level of education that any of us is in, is to always be in wonder of that which we do not yet know and be looking for someone to lead us into a greater knowledge of that.
Dude, that was huge. You've kind of taken the point that I should have mentioned already, because of course Aristotle says that wonder is the beginning of philosophy. And so I'm gonna give an image. This might be a little bit of a stark image, but picture me in a philosophy classroom trying to deal with someone who say I present a dialogue of Plato that we're going to read together, and someone texts in Aristotle, and there's this kind of attitude of, I already read that.
Or I know what he's saying. I
I'm
know what he's
telling
saying.
you, this often happens, often, too often. Of those who have studied it too early, they have this horrible, horrible sense that they've, quote, already done it. And I'll tell you right now, one thing that's going to absolutely shoot me in the foot in trying to introduce them to philosophy is kind of, haven't I already kind of done this? Something went very wrong. Honestly, this is nuance. Do I think that you could start doing some of these texts earlier on? I do. But let's be frank. At high school, in general, there's, God bless the people teaching in the high schools, but by and large, it often will not be someone who has had the kind of experience in philosophy that's going to be prepared to present it in a very particular, gentle, careful, humble, even, might I say, tentative, wonder-inducing way of raising certain questions, but far from kind of giving you the doctrine. But very often it's kind of the more new teacher, the less experienced teacher that is more going to just focus, well, I'm just going to kind of give
Read
it to
the
them.
text.
Kind of, here's here are the points. Do we see this? Does anyone have any questions? Let's move on. And so,
yeah, and I'd also add to that, it might not just be the fault of the teacher at the high school level. I think that there is something particular about that age. The mind at that age is looking for discrete facts to put together in a discursive way. So they actually need to be guided through a place of wonder. Whereas what they're looking for is building blocks. Like they're looking around their social community. How do I fit in? How do these people fit in? Different genders, different, ages. But they kind of want to have things to grab onto to fit together comfortably and conveniently. And that is a little bit antithetical to the philosophical habit of mind. So it's not even that they're not ready, they're too dumb. They're just in a different place in their intellectual formation.
That's very reasonable. I'm going to up the ante. Another aspect I think is complementary to that one in the same way, similar way, is our academic system tends to be too grade-based, too performance-based. And so students almost universally have this experience of, what do I need to know for the exam so that I can perform on the exam? This is a problem at any level when you're studying philosophy. Socrates would have been horrified at the kind of, well, what's the answer so I can put it on the exam? At the college level, I, as a philosophy professor, have to work very hard against just, philosophy is about having the answer, the right answer, rather than, as it were, the right attitude and the right question. And in high school, again, they're even more kind of in the zone of having the right answer,
and succeeding.
My biggest concerns very often are for the smartest students. In many ways, it's the smartest students who have performed very well, who have been given the sense of, hey, I can perform really well and get ready, and I can get into a prestigious university. I can get the grade, I can perform on the standardized tests in a certain way. And this doesn't have to be a problem. It can be managed, but it needs to be managed by parents who are thinking clearly about this and remembering that education is ultimately to become a certain kind of person. And we might say a person who is wise. And a person who is wise is a person who is highly aware of his limitations. A person who is wise is always a person who is very humble and who knows his ignorance. I say to my students, the greatest danger, Socrates pointed out, and it is universally so, is not knowing what you don't know. Meaning not being aware of your own ignorance. And something to be thinking about as regards this whole thing, I think that needs to be noted, is our educational system tends to be too much competition based. I need to get the grades to put me in this percentile so I'm ahead of the others. And that must mean I'm doing okay.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it also becomes a standard of measurement of the personal value of the student, which is devastating.
That's a whole topic in itself.
Exceedingly short measuring stick.
We're raising some trouble spots right here, not to cause panic in the parents, but so it's part of your discussion. It's part of your awareness. So you're asking yourself, again, what are we going to do to form our children here this year and the next year and the next year? How are we helping them have a wisdom disposition? How are we helping them to be humble? How are we helping them to recognize their own ignorance, to keep being persevering, being willing to work hard, and to recognize them for their success, but also recognize that you're going to need teachers, you're going to need real good mentors and masters in an ongoing way. What does it take to be docile, able to be taught? What does it take to be a good disciple? This is a huge part. Are we thinking about that in the high school education of our children? Are we making them docile? Are we preparing them, as one of my colleagues loves to say, to be lifelong learners? That is a beautiful and wonderful and important point. We're
wrapping up here, I just wanted to give a little bit, if I may, just a little bit of a practical silhouette of what kind of an educational trajectory might look like from, early years to high school. Just very briefly, just our thought about how those things fall out on a practical level is my idea that from the very, very young, up until about high school, late middle school to high school level is just really a time of plenitude and personal relationship. It's not so important what facts you get during that time as the way they are presented to you. So lots and lots of reading out loud, especially of picture books. Chapter books are good too. They develop different kind of muscles in the brain, but picture books are really good. Even as children get older, they invite that personal time together when you read picture books out loud. Of course, reading and writing, certain rudiments of those are simply things that are required, but they should be kind of acquired in a joyful, relaxed way without a specific timeline. Of course, if you're noticing that your child isn't reading or isn't able to write, it may be that some kind of intervention is needed, professional help with a tutor or a specialist in that area. So it's always good to be attentive. But children learn those things at very different rates.
Yeah.
So be aware and attentive, but very relaxed, and give lots of room for development to happen at different stages,
Right.
especially between genders. And then once your child starts entering into the high school level, an educator once described it to me that we give them a worldview over principles and worldview during the early part of their education. Then in high school, they do have to know facts. They become the pegs on which you hang a lot of these principles and worldview that you've kind of inculcated in the earlier years. So the high school time is a time of a certain kind of rigor, academic rigor that requires a discipline. And so I think it's important to do that without sacrificing these greater principles that we're talking about, and to seek environments in which your child is given the opportunity to do that. But very importantly, it's very helpful to do that in a communal fashion. I think the high school level, because education is relational, it's very important for them to be receiving these new things together with other people who are receiving them for the first time as well. That's a very powerful part of kind of developing those pegs that you begin to be able to hang, the facts that which you begin to hang life. So our kind of approach to educating the children has just been, in the beginning, time of plenitude and wonder growth and expansion, and joyfully unfolding these new things to them that they've never learned. Once you get to the high school period, it's a good time for students to kind of experience a certain type of rigor of intellectual and academic practice that also prepares them to be able to integrate it into higher education. Anyway, that's just a little sketch of kind of the big picture
I love that.
of a way to try to keep a sense of wonder, a sense of joy in moving forward, creating lifelong learners who are always aware of what they don't yet know.
I love that. I'm just going to throw in a concluding plug for two simple things. Great music, great music, great music. That's one of them.
Yeah.
The ancients were
Absolutely.
convinced of this. It forms taste and desires. It makes times of plenitude, and it's intellectual formation.
Yeah.
It's an astounding gift. We have some separate podcasts on that. And the others, remember, Sundays in the home are probably the most important day of, quote, education. They're the days we should be most alive, the days that our children most learn what is most important to us. How we live Sunday will form their hearts for life.
Beautiful. I love it.
Thanks for the discussion, dear. Great to be with you all. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.